News Ahead.
Well, joining me this morning, Rory Boyle, podcaster and commentator, and chap Barwell, Conservative campaign manager. Good morning.
Good morning.
You're looking much more wintry today.
I am looking more wintry, and you're toned down.
I am. Well, because it's January, you see. And today is the day when you stop saying Happy New Year, apparently.
Apparently, and also we've got some serious financial issues to discuss, so I thought, I'd get out of my short-sleeve shirts and into a jumper.
Shall we start, gentlemen, by talking about this huge story this morning about energy? It is absolutely freezing out there. We've now got a position where you've got not any bloke, the head of Centrica, who is saying we've only got a week's worth of gas left in this country. We have a massive energy problem. We're already experiencing some of the highest prices in the world. You've got Ed Miliband saying that we need to carry on with net zero. You've also got the government saying, actually, what we need to do is stamp out the volatility of gas. It's total madness.
Well, of course it is, and I think this is the accumulation of allowing Ed Miliband, who was a failed candidate for Prime Minister back in 2015, to run our energy sector. Look, we can, in my opinion, we can tackle climate change through innovation and technological advancements without threatening the energy we have now. It's always obvious to common sense people that a green transition and a reliance on renewables was going to be inconsistent. Renewables do not produce the same consistent energy sources than nuclear, which the Lib Dems pushed back on when we were in coalition with them and we should have been stronger on, and fossil fuels. We need to achieve green, but we need to do it in a way.
We should have been stronger. What do you mean?
We should have been stronger on pushing for nuclear energy earliest.
Why weren't you?
Well, when the Conservatives were back in coalition, it was Nick Clegg and the Lib Dems who pushed back on that. The Lib Dems are never on the right side of any issue, and we should have done more on that. And actually, Labour should have come out stronger for it as well. And fossil fuels we need to continue to use at rates that will keep the energy sector safe until we have enough green energy to fully transition.
OK, let's look at this, Rory, because when I came on air this morning, about 50% of our energy use at that time, 2 hours ago, was coming from gas.
Yeah.
It has now gone up to nearly 60%. So as people wake up, put on the kettle and need to heat their homes and stuff, we're now at 60% coming from fossil fuels. Only 11% is coming from renewables. I don't understand why the government is continuing head first down this hole. Surely what we need is an energy mix. You want it to come from all sources, from nuclear, for sure, renewables, but actually we still rely on gas. Let me just tell you, 28 million homes rely on gas boilers. 28 million.
Yeah, and there's 200,000 jobs in oil and gas.
Exactly.
That, obviously is hugely beneficial for people. I know that barely any of our energy at the moment is coming from wind, not a lot from solar. Now, look,
none from solar.
Look, I am pro net zero, but I will say this. I do think that, we're way off track in terms of the climate targets that Labour have set. And there's actually a lot of great information on The Chemical Engineer. If anyone wants to check out that website, they write some really great pieces where they've sort of exemplified that. So I think net zero, I'm not trying to completely scrap that. I know maybe some people watching this or listening to this might want that. I don't. But I think there's nothing wrong with moving a target. And we might come on to talk about this.
What do you mean moving at all?
Well, what I'm saying is, Labour have this sort of hell-bent stance on we've got to get to net zero by a certain date. Look,
by 2030.
Yeah, let's. I'm not.
So you're saying just loosen the criteria?
I'm saying loosen the criteria, and it's a bit like we might come on to talk about this in terms of Rachel Reeves. Don't want to get too ahead of the game, but in my opinion, and I know the press would have a field day anytime this happens, especially some of the red top papers, but there's nothing wrong sometimes, in my view, with holding your hands up and saying, look, we got it wrong. We need to now rejig this a bit, with the budget. That could totally be something that was beneficial to us.
I mean, that is grown-up politics to say, look, we got it wrong. And I think they have got it wrong. And I think many people, particularly young people, what we do know is that they want to move towards net zero. I have long argued that actually it's what Rory says, which is it's this arbitrary cut-off. We are cutting off our noses to spite our face, where what we need to do is to build nuclear power stations, which you failed to do as a government. We need to get the SMRs up and running. But I would like to see fracking. We are sitting on tons of treasure underneath our feet. I want cheap energy. We've now got elderly people freezing literally to death because of the changes implemented by the government. What we need to do is to have cheap energy. That then fuels industry and that fuels the economy.
Well, firstly, all parties failed to achieve nuclear, and I think everybody should hold their hands up on that. Look, I want cheap energy as well. And what I want more than anything is I want a net zero policy that brings the entire country with us, not just big city folk. And what I mean by that is rural communities being decimated by the policies. Poorer people in rural areas can't afford the cost of new boilers that they're being forced to bring, the cost of electric vehicles, which don't have longevity in their batteries to get around rural areas, and there aren't enough charging points in areas like East Devon,
no one knows
where my family are from.
But no one knows how long an electric vehicle lasts.
Well,
That's
exactly.
one of the things. I had this conversation with someone, with a dealer, with a car dealer, saying, should I hold on? I have an electric car. Should I hold on to my car, which is now 3 years old, for 4, 5, 6 years? And he said, I wouldn't if I was you. That's the dealer.
Well, I think even the dealers are admitting that the battery life that you get claims for on electric vehicles aren't actually accurate, and so we're getting faulty information, and people are buying things that aren't always quite what they're being sold. And buying things that aren't quite what they're sold kind of sums up net zero, because we're told that young people want it, we're told people want to achieve it. I actually would say it's more young people in cities. I don't necessarily think it's people across the entire country. Those people are always oversampled when we talk about young people.
That's interesting, and I think, did you not grow up in a more rural area?
I actually grew up in Dublin, so I'm a city girl through and through.
Fine.
Yeah.
So is that true, where you've got younger people who are metropolitan-based, who are probably more pro-net zero than living in the middle of the sticks?
I think that probably is true. I think some of that goes back to the media that certain young people would consume in a cosmopolitan city as opposed to, let's say, a young farmer. So, you know, I think sometimes our views are skewered by what we consume. I do just want to point out, though, you know, the head of Centrica saying that, you know, they want subsidies to fund a $2 billion expansion and that, you know, we're 26% lower. I get that, but that is what he's going to say, right? Is that going to solve all of our problems, this $2 billion expansion? I don't know. I'm posing that question.
No, but I think what you do is you have an energy mix. Let's just move on, though, and talk about front page of the Eye, if I can find it this morning. Again, really stark news for Rachel Reeves. Essentially, here it is. Mortgage rates set to rise. Rachel Reeves faces a crunch weeks on the UK economy. Rachel Reeves is nowhere to be seen. She is in China. Let me put that to you, Rory. She's there. Andrew Bailey, the governor of the Bank of England. You've got the head of the FCA, all in China at a time when the economy is in free fall, the pound is plummeting, and what we need desperately is reassurance from the government they know what they're doing. She's nowhere to be seen. She leaves Darren Jones to give a statement which came across as supercilious at best and naive at worst.
Yeah, this is really bad, and I think that, you know, China should certainly not be our only hope. Now, I do understand why Rachel Reeves has gone out there. The UK is in a complete economic mess and something needs to change. But, you know, what she could have done, what perhaps would have reassured at least myself, and I imagine many other people, was sort of explain these actions more, because I think she's up against it in terms of the press. She is, okay? The press are attacking her left, right and centre. But if she'd just written an article, let's say for the Times, for, you know, quite a centre newspaper in my view.
She did actually
and,
write
you know,
for the Times.
and just say something like, look, guys, trust me on this one. I know what I'm doing.
Well, OK, but let's just look at the facts here. So Britain's debt bill out of control. She's spending 100 billion quid more than the Tories did. She gave herself £9.9 billion pounds worth of fiscal headroom. She's going to break her own financial rules, which she said she wouldn't do. She said the budget we had, we're only going to have one. We're fixing the foundations, remember? Do you remember all that? And, of course, she raised much more money. Now it looks like she's going to have to come back, have another budget. She's going to have to slash spending, and she is probably going to raise tax as well. This smacks to me as someone who is way out of her depth.
Well, Rory said she should have written an article in the right-wing media and she needed to tell people to trust them. Now, trust, that's an interesting word, isn't it? This from a Chancellor who said she was qualified to be a Chancellor because she'd been an economist at the Bank of England. She lied. This from a Chancellor who said Labour would protect farmers and not add inheritance tax, protect the winter fuel payments, give payouts to waspy women. She lied on all of those points. She said there was a 22 billion black hole, then she spent 24 billion in the first month that she got in. She lied about that. She said she wouldn't bring more tax rises, yet she's going to have to do that to fund the extra spending that she's got. She lied about everything.
But should she have gone to China?
No, I think she should be here. She should be responding to the 10-year gilt yields that have been at 5.1%, which is the highest since 2007, when we also had a Labour Chancellor. There's a running theme there. She should be in this country being held accountable for the lies that she's telling British people week in, week out, and they are done with being fobbed off by this fob of a Chancellor.
So it's quite interesting, because normally when this happens, it would normally strengthen the currency, but it hasn't, and that shows that investors are losing faith. We were talking about this earlier. They're moving to invest in gold away from sterling. That is a major problem. Should she have gone to China?
Well, I think some people have major security concerns around China as well for obvious reasons.
Should she have gone, though?
Should she have gone? I don't see the problem with her going. I think something needs...
Even at a time of what I think is national crisis.
Yes, I think something needs to change, and I think that, you know, she's trying to make this bold move in order to create economic growth and to get us in a better position. However, my position is that I would like to see more explanation of these actions. I think if you're somebody who's reading the headlines and doesn't fully understand what's happening and why it's happening, we need more insight to that from the government. I think what people have been saying also is very true about how it seems like they have, let's say, created this budget, created these targets, and they're just going to stick to them and they're not going to review things. It's like full steam ahead. And I want to see, I want more insight into that process, basically. Also, another thing I want is a mortgage. And that's something I'm very worried about. You know, I'm a relatively young person living in London. Each year that I get older, it seems further and further far away for that to happen for me. And, you know, I've got a full-time job, I'm on an okay salary, and yet that still feels like this massive goal. And so these headlines about mortgage rates increasing are scary to me.
Well, Labour aren't going to meet their housing targets, and let's note that they cut the housing numbers in London. But, David, can I just change tack for a moment? Isn't it fascinating that Labour left-wing MPs don't have a problem with Rachel Reeves going to China? When we talk about the Israel-Palestine issue, left-wing Labour MPs make the point we shouldn't be working with Israel because of the way that they treat Muslims in the Middle East. I think that that's a fair debate to have. Isn't it interesting that when you get a left-wing government in China and the way they treat Muslims in the Xinjiang region, suddenly it's not an issue for left-wing Labour MPs? I mean, I'm fascinated by that.
Well, it's an interesting point. Let me just ask you this. How have we managed to do a volte-face on our China policy? So you had Cameron and Osborne saying this is the golden opportunity for China. Then you have Rishi Sunak, who wakes up to the reality of China, saying that actually this is over now. And suddenly Rachel Reeves, now China is back on. China, as I have said consistently this morning, will do what is best for China.
We need an economic relationship with China because we don't want to fall behind these superpower economies. But we've got to be honest about it. China is a brutal authoritarian dictatorship. It suppresses protests, which the left keep claiming they want until it's an issue they don't agree with. And it's working in tangent with Russia and North Korea, who are far, far, far from countries that we are on the same side as. Rory. This is a dangerous international policy.
I would argue, though, look, I think, yes, of course, the left are big on protesting. I can't deny that. But I think that, in my view, the left are fine with people protesting about what they want. What we don't like is thuggery and violent protests.
Just to check, that includes the anti-lockdown protesters, would it?
The anti-lockdown protesters I was not in favour of, but I certainly wasn't screaming from the rooftops that they didn't have the right to protest.
Well, many on the left were. It doesn't matter whether you agree with the issue or not. It matters whether you agree with their right to an opinion.
I just want to go back to something you said, Rory. Yeah. So when you've got Lord Spencer, who's the former Tory party treasurer, I have a lot of time for Michael Spencer, he says Rachel Reeves has got herself into a catastrophic mess, should have abandoned her trip. Just in terms of those markets, had Rachel Reeves stood up and said, look, there is a plan, this is what we're doing, wouldn't that have been a much, much sager decision?
Yeah, totally. I think that would have reassured people, some of the people that you just mentioned, obviously the winter fuel allowance, older people who were affected by that. OK, I think the WASPy women, I think a lot of them had plenty of notice on what was happening. Not all, but plenty. And I think there was a lot of entitlement with some of the farmers. But...
Entitlement?
Yes.
Oh, I have to pick that up. I have to go to a break.
Some entitlement.
Well,
I need to come back to that afterwards.
Right, all right, we'll pause. Just before the break, Rory made a rather inflammatory comment about, what did you say, farmers, the entitlement of farmers?
I'm laughing as you're asking me this because, look, it's cold outside, but you could cut the tension with a knife in this studio.
Is that right? No, why? You mentioned entitlement to farmers. Explain.
What I meant was, look, I understand that inheritance tax is going to greatly affect certain farmers, but I think some of the people at those protests, i.e. Katie Hopkins and Jeremy Clarkson, there was entitlement with them. Come on.
Oh, that's different. That's different. I mean, again, not reported this morning is actually the numbers of tractors that were on manoeuvres yesterday to try and make a political point. The fact is that the numbers, again, don't add up. And there's another big story this morning, and maybe this is, we'll package all this together, just in terms of priorities for an incoming administration that has had 14 years to think about policies. So they attack the winter fuel allowance. They're now going to look at disability benefits, and I don't think that is incorrect. That being said, I wouldn't have it up there as your flagship manifesto policy. The pound is in freefall. The economy is an absolute mess. We've got massive tax rises, and I think people, and that's why I'm asking the question this morning, how optimistic are you for how optimistic are you?
Not particularly, David. I'm only optimistic to be able to join you in the studio in the morning. Look, let's just touch on that briefly, and then we'll come on to that interesting claim about the farmers, because I can't let that go.
All right.
Look, Rachel Reeves has no plan. How do we know that? She's literally sent out a memo that got leaked to business organisations asking for advice on creating a plan. So we know she has no plan.
Have you got a plan?
Labour's policy so far has just been to irritate as many different groups in society as they can. Waspy women, pensioners, farmers, business owners, young people with the tuition fees, people that need buses and cancelling hospitals, new train line extensions. They have just tried to wind up every single group, and newsflash, that doesn't tend to work very well at elections. If I can just touch briefly on the farmers.
You can.
That's the first I've ever heard that Katie Hopkins was a farmer. I thought she was a radio personality, so I'm not sure why she's an example.
I can think of a few ways to describe it. We won't go there at this time of the morning.
Well, that's fine, but let's go there about the farmers.
Yeah.
Ordinary farmers work incredibly hard. They only tend to make about £30,000 a year because they're asset heavy, because they own their farms, but they're cash light. Now, let me say this to people that are naturally sceptical and they're on the left. You want to achieve climate change, the worst thing we can do is use gas-guzzling planes to fly food in because we're producing food in foreign countries, because we turn our backs on the British farmers. They stood up for their communities in COVID. They kept their communities nice and healthy. They produced the food we needed here. Support them now. They deserve it.
But you see, the farmers, and I know a lot of farmers, they're not the types to go on strikes and marches and all the rest of it. If you're now in a position where they're taking tractors into Westminster, and this is the beginning of what we're going to see, if they really want to do this, the farmers can stop food going onto the shelves.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I've actually made that point on this programme before, that I am definitely pro us not importing so much food. I mean, we've all been in the supermarket.
But you're pro the inheritance tax changes on farms?
I think that the inheritance tax changes on farms has been blown slightly out of proportion. I think it actually affects...
Where people are in tears and thinking about committing suicide because they can't pay the inheritance tax.
Look, I don't want to see anyone in tears or anyone thinking about committing suicide. That's never something I'm going to be pro, obviously. So, you know, I'm not trying to hurt anyone anymore. I'm just saying that there seemed to be a lot of entitlement, and I think that policy needs to be rethought.
Why entitlement?
May I just say...
Yeah, hang on, I just want to understand the entitlement bit.
Because I thought there were a lot of wealthy farmers who were also protesting, who it's not going to greatly affect, who are going to hand down these massive properties and massive...
But Jack is right. The majority of them actually are asset-rich, cash-poor. Farming, their margins are squeezed by the supermarket so much that actually it's very difficult for them to make money. Also, when you pragmatically look at that policy and say to pay the inheritance tax, you're going to have to sell bits of your farm, that seems to be shooting yourself in the foot.
Well, yes, I suppose that's a hard cross to bear, but I don't know. Guys, I saw a lot of entitlement from those protesters. I think you need to look back at some of the people who were there and what they were saying. It was bad. We can get that footage up if someone has it.
David, I must just jump in. Entitlement's an interesting word, and I think a lot of farmers think that people in the cities are very entitled. They want all the produce that the farmers produce, but they never want to support them economically.
I don't think they know where it comes from.
They don't. A really bad way to make an argument, in my view, is to just pick out a couple of extreme examples and say that's everyone. You know, when we talk about immigration and people pick out a couple of extreme examples of people that are racist and they go, everybody that makes this argument must be a racist. That's not the right way to make an argument. We must stand for farmers. I have farmers and people that have done manual labour jobs in rural areas of Devon in my family. They started working at 15. They're still working today at 75. These people have held up the British society. For God's sake, let's support them. And if any farmers are listening, I will always be on your side.
It is a bad way to, bring up an argument. People do that all the time with the left too. For example, when Trump got re-elected, they are playing all these clips of all the quote-unquote lefty loonies. I want to point out that the last time Trump lost an election, his supporters stormed the Capitol building. So, people always pick and choose these things.
Fair point, but if the best way to have a go at farmers is to have to bring in Donald Trump, it would suggest the argument isn't that strong in the first place.
I'm not bringing in Donald Trump to the farmers, bringing in Donald Trump to lefties. So,
well, they can hang out.
He's nothing. Although he
I'm
might
happy for them to hang out as long as we can support my farmers in Devon. heaven.
You two can carry this conversation on. We'll go to a break. After the break, I want to talk about Andy Burnham and breaking ranks with Starmer to back the Grooming Gang inquiry. The question I have this morning is, what is Andy Burnham up to? Is he on manoeuvres? This is Weekend Breakfast. Let's move on and talk about the Grooming Gangs, which obviously has been making all the headlines recently. Now, Andy Burnham has defied Keir Starmer to call for a national inquiry into grooming gangs. He believes there is a case for a limited national inquiry. As we know, of course, Sir Keir Starmer ordered MPs to vote to block a national inquiry into the gangs on, this was on Wednesday evening. The Prime Minister didn't take part in that vote, despite ordering people to vote in a particular way. Andy Burnham, what he's on manoeuvres here, I think.
Yeah, listen, I really like Andy Burnham. I used to live in Manchester, and I think it's an amazing city, and I actually have a lot of respect for him. And I really like the word that he used, limited, because we did have the J report, which I think actually has presented some great points that we can build on. So mandatory reporting, new child protection agency, and national redress scheme. I think they're all really important and really good findings. However, I will just say, I really want to get this across for anyone viewing or listening. I watched a series that's still available on BBC iPlayer, free to watch if you pay your licence fee, called 3 Girls, which shows a harrowing depiction of 3 real girls who were in these gangs, unfortunately victims of the worst kind of trauma and abuse that I think anyone could really imagine. It's one of those series that will stay with me for life, and it's real people. You know, Maggie Oliver is also depicted in there. I know she's been on this station multiple times. The reason I'm bringing all of that up is, when you watch that and when you see what those girls went through and when you see what many victims of these gangs are calling for, it is a new inquiry.
And you are right to talk about Jay's recommendations. It was a 7-year investigation between 2015 and 2022. 15 investigations into grooming gangs and abuse in school and church settings. And then, of course, there's been no national inquiry. There has been various inquiries into Oldham, Telford, Rochdale, Rotherham and so on. When you look at the sheer numbers here, we are talking about thousands of children, young people who are affected. Surely there has to be a full inquiry. How many people were affected? Who knew? Why didn't we talk about it? And the impact on those children.
So I've been talking about politics for about 10 years now. This is honestly one of the most sickening things I think I have ever discussed. Not only the act, the cover-up that went on, which in my opinion, and if people don't like this, they can have it, was because people were scared to talk about an issue where they
Why were they scared?
Because they thought they were going to be called racist. Because political correctness won out over mass rape. I can't believe I'm on talkTV this morning saying that, but that is the truth. That's what's going on here. We need to call it out. All political parties failed on this. More should have been done. That's obvious. At least now some parties are coming to the table and realising we need that national inquiry to get to the bottom of what really went on. The J inquiry was great, and we've acted on some of the recommendations. Let's act,
but not enough. But
not the rest of them. But it doesn't have all the information. It hasn't covered some of the more recent cases.
The government must act urgently on a national epidemic of child sexual abuse. Let's look at the front page of The Guardian this morning. Grooming gang rhetoric risks inciting massacre. Wes Streeting saying we can't talk about it again.
So, if I may, let's be really clear about why Wes Streeting did this. Wes Streeting did this because he came within about 500 votes of
528
of losing to an independent who, I don't want to presume their views, but one might wonder will not be the first person to jump ahead and talk about this story. Whether I'm right or wrong about that, I do believe that that is why Wes Streeting is coming out and not being as strong on this issue as he really ought to be, given we all know he's the de facto Prime Minister at this point.
That's an interesting point. Wes Streeting is saying we shouldn't be talking about it. The rest of the country is saying we should talk about it.
We should talk about it. Listen, we should, and that point of failure is a really good one because, again, in this series, it depicts that not only, of course, governments and, you know, people at the top have failed, but it's also as basic as, you know, young girls were going to sexual health clinics. They were 15, you know, should not have been having sex, and they are being referred to as child prostitutes. There is no such thing as a child prostitute. There are only victims of sexual abuse when you were that young. And so...
Well, they weren't believed either, were they?
No, they weren't
went to
at
the police.
all. The way they were treated is beyond appalling. And also, I want to point out as well, there were boys who've been affected by these gangs too, just to name that. So, of course, we need to be talking about it. Now, look, I understand, unfortunately, when there is a vast number of Asian men who are perpetrating these crimes, that unfortunately there are a number of people who jump on a racist bandwagon and try and paint everyone with the same brush. So there is something to be said for that. I get that point, but that does not mean that we can't talk about it, because this is what happens when we don't. The problem continues, more people are victims of abuse, and the cycle just goes on and on. So he's wrong on that one.
OK, let's move on very quickly to a final story. Apparently, the prospect of an anti-ageing vaccine is closer than ever, according to scientists. They're looking at a raft of measures that people can take to stave off decline of your advancing age. It's really interesting, this, actually. It's looking at the immune system. It's looking at the imbalance of the number of immune cells we produce, leading to inflammation, which is believed to be the driver of ageing, and the rise of what we call senescent cells. These are zombie cells. These are cells that linger in our body. You don't dispose of them, and that causes the ageing problem. It got me thinking this morning, Jack, would you want to live forever if we have a vaccine that keeps you young?
Oh dear, well, I quite enjoy being young, but would we want to live forever? I don't know. It depends on where the country's heading, really, doesn't it?
You brought that back down to a political point.
I tried to. I could have made a whole point about the winter fuel payments and pensions, but I thought I wouldn't do that. I'd get told off. I'd get told off. No, look, I think most people would like to prolong their life, but whether we want to live forever, I mean, the whole point of life is that it is finite, and you have to make the most of the time you have here. We only get to live it once, and everybody should strive to achieve as much as they can. And if we had permanent life, I'm not sure that it would hold so much value to people. Life is so sacred and important.
It's interesting. I had this conversation with Gabriella, my setup producer, yesterday, saying, would you want to live forever? And that point is valid, which is it's finite, so therefore you embrace life and you make the most of it. Wouldn't you, if you live for, say, 100, 200 years, wouldn't you be bored?
Wouldn't you be lonely as well?
And lonely.
Have you watched The Substance with Demi Moore? She just won the Golden Globe for it. She's tipped for the Oscar, and that film is basically about this injection that essentially preserves your youth. And let's just say it doesn't quite go in Demi's favour, so that film is definitely
Would you want to live for much longer?
I wouldn't want to live longer than the natural lifespan for someone of my age, because I think that this is the order of things. This is how it's supposed to be. And, you know, the aging process is all part of life. Sadly, we live in a youth-obsessed society. That's not changing anytime soon. But, you know, when it comes to Ozempic or when it comes to this, I don't know how I feel about all of the above. I'm not going near, you know, any of those things. Not that I need Ozempic.
Well, the only thing is also, if you are the only one that lives to a certain age or are much older, you lose all your friends and you lose your family. So I'm not sure that is ideal, really, to put it mildly.
I'm a very popular guy, David. I wouldn't want to be left without all my many friends. So that's a good argument.
And the talk viewers want to see me living for years and years and years.
They do. I'm not sure about the farmers, but the viewers of this show do.
The farmers are out to get you.
That's all right.
Thank you, gentlemen. Rory Boyle, podcaster and commentator, Barwell, Conservative campaign manager. That was today's Head to Head.